Hey, everybody, and welcome again to Victory's virtual workshop, where we unpack complex financial and economic topics and try to make them accessible for you. I'm Patrick Huey, and today is January 24th, 2024. Greetings from the road here in sunny but cold Denver, Colorado. Today, we're diving into a fundamental aspect of your financial plan, and that is taxes. So grab your headphones and something to jot down some notes, and join us as we explore what may be the coming tax storm for retirees. Just want to remind everybody to feel free to jump into the chat and ask any questions. Paste your questions there. You can see the button. Use this chat button to ask your questions. Or if there's more personal questions that need to be taken offline, I can certainly reach out to you afterwards. And a transcript, as a reminder, will be available to you on Friday, as well as the video recap. Okay, so let's jump on in. Let's start with a pop quiz. True or false, your taxes will or are lower in retirement? Well, many of us, including me, because this is how I was taught, have been operating for a long time under what I think of as a popular myth now, and that is that our tax rates will almost automatically be lower in the future, particularly in retirement as they are today. And therefore, we often choose savings vehicles that defer our tax bill until a later date. Things like traditional IRAs and 401ks are two examples. Now, for the children of the Depression and the early baby boomers, they probably did fall into that lower tax bracket in retirement. They often stopped taking vacations. They spent less money than when they were working, and they tightened their belts in order to be able to live on that quote unquote fixed income in retirement. For others, especially the later boomers, they're now having a different lifestyle in retirement. They're going to every new restaurant, they're traveling the world, and they're spending time at the lake house with the kids and grandkids. So their retirement spending actually may outpace that of their working years, at least for some years of their retirement. Retirement for them is really seen as the reward for their years of hard work and savings, and they are looking to be rewarded. They're looking to maintain their income in retirement, and they're looking to meet their goals and dreams by doing that. Now, because of that, we often don't fall into a lower tax bracket in retirement for a couple of reasons. Number one, we have fewer tax deductions. Generally, by retirement, the home's paid off. If you're lucky, the children are out of there by the time you've sold it. Second, they want to travel. They want to enjoy the hobbies that they didn't have time for while they were working, and that often means more spending. And third, future tax rates are actually likely to be higher. I'm going to say that again. Future tax rates are actually likely to be higher than during many people's working years. Historically speaking, we're currently at some of the lowest tax rates we've ever seen in our nation's history, and yet we continue to spend quite a bit of money through the government. I know it doesn't feel like we're living through a low tax environment or a time period, but we are, and we'll look at some of the reasons for that in a minute. So the answer to the true or false question that we're posing here, will your taxes be lower in retirement? As always, it depends. Everyone's situation is different, but I think this is most likely false now for many of us. So we talked about, we talked about these tax-deferred vehicles that we put money into, right? Some of our most popular savings vehicles, such as IRAs and 401ks, are very much based on this premise that taxes are going to be lower in retirement. These tax-deferred vehicles allow us to defer paying taxes on our contributions, and we pay those taxes when we take them out. And all that growth that goes into those funds, that however much they grow over time, is also taxed because that's part of your distribution at retirement. And in fact, you've got the government as a silent participant in your retirement plan, and it'll want those taxes repaid in the future. Here's the rub. There's no guarantee that those tax rates will be exactly what they were when you started putting money into those tax-deferred accounts. There's no guarantee what those tax rates will be when the government is ready to collect. Since coronavirus-related shutdowns ground the economy to basically a near halt in the spring of 2020, Congress and the Federal Reserve have pumped trillions of dollars into programs aimed at fighting coronavirus and bailing out industries and small businesses that were negatively affected by the virus. In essence, to save the economy. And while we've seen some rebounds economically, obviously, from the early days of the pandemic, we've also seen even more government spending. March 27th of 2020 was the day the historic CARES, C-A-R-E-S Act was signed by then President Trump, putting $2.2 trillion of stimulus money into the economy. And while there's been some debate on exactly how those funds were doled out, here's what's not up for debate. Those funds were essentially an emergency loan to us from the government. And that wasn't the end. Just before the calendar page turned to 2021, then President Trump signed into law an additional $900 billion stimulus package, representing the second largest federal stimulus package in history after the aforementioned CARES Act. At this time, also, the Federal Reserve balance had grown from about 4.4 trillion had grown to about 4.4 trillion due to relief efforts since the start of the pandemic. And then on March 11th, 2021, President Biden signed into law the $1.9 trillion plan to combat the coronavirus and stimulate the economy called the American Rescue Plan. Then just 8 months later, another $1.2 trillion was authorized for spending when President Biden signed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act into law on November 15th, 2021. Then on August 16th, 2022, the president signed the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Got all that? Well, when we add it all together, the 3 rounds of stimulus checks, the Federal Reserve's actions during the course of the pandemic, plus the infrastructure spending bill, that staggering total is somewhere between 10 and 12 trillion dollars. Take a minute to digest that. If your brain is reeling from those numbers, you're not alone. Those are some big bills we've racked up as a nation, all of which must be repaid at some point. So, how do we pay for all this? Well, something has to change. Now, don't take my word for it. Take the U.S. government's. According to the Bureau of Fiscal Service, quote, the current fiscal path is unsustainable, end quote. And according to the Congressional Budget Office, quote, perpetually rising debt would also increase the likelihood of a fiscal crisis and pose other risks to the U.S. economy, end quote. Interest costs on the national debt are projected to total about $66 trillion over the next 30 years. And if that forecast holds true, they would become the largest program in the federal budget within that period, surpassing Medicare in 2046 and Social Security in 2049. Now, people disagree as to if our growing debt is the result of too much spending or too little tax revenue. But regardless of who's right, the projections show that the gap between spending and revenue will continue to grow unless something changes. But there are really very few options. So what do? Well, we really have to ask ourselves a serious question at this point. What is Congress good at doing? What are they good at accomplishing? Well, if you answered nothing, you are a pessimist or a realist. I'm not sure which. But what I do know is that by doing nothing, which Congress may or may not be good at, they can begin to address this problem by taking a turn towards higher taxes. Why? Because tax rates are already scheduled to go up in 2026. And the reason is that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, passed in 2017, made substantial changes to the tax rate for individuals, reducing tax rates at almost all levels and shifting the thresholds for several income tax brackets. And guess what? Those cuts are already scheduled to sunset on December 31st, 2025. unless extended by Congress. It will take a literal act of Congress to keep tax brackets where they currently are. Good luck with that. Another reason we anticipate higher taxes in the future, we're currently experiencing historically low tax rates, as we talked about. And what goes down in Washington world eventually must come up. And the highest top marginal rate was up to 94%, as you can see in the chart, in 1945. That was to help pay off the cost of World War II. And the top rate was 69% in 1981 when Ronald Reagan became president. Now, there's plenty of pressure now to at least return to a top marginal tax rate of not less than 39.6%, the pre-Tax Cut and Jobs Act level. So it remains to be seen if we'll let that law simply sunset in 2025 or speed up that potential tax increase and perhaps additional tax increases. So what do you do? What do you do right now to optimize your overall financial plans? Well, here are two tactics to consider in 2024. First, consider reallocating your buckets. Now, this requires understanding the difference between a micro and a macro view of taxation. A micro view focuses on your current year's taxes. It's typically what you talk to your CPA about. A macro view, and what we can help you with, focuses on lifetime taxes through retirement. It's the reason why we ask for your taxes after they're filed, and we incorporate tax planning into our comprehensive planning suite. When we look at diversifying assets by how they're taxed, we generally think of the three buckets here on the slide. And they represent the three broad categories based on how income is taxed. You have taxable income, you have tax-deferred income, and you have income tax-free income. The taxable income bucket includes things like a pension, short-term capital gains, stock dividends, interest on CDs, which there actually is some now, and dividends and taxable distributions from things like mutual funds or non-qualified accounts. Generally, these are accounts for which you typically receive a Form 1099 each year. The tax-deferred bucket may include things like your traditional IRAs, your 401ks, 403bs, other employer-established retirement accounts. And the income tax-free bucket would be your Roth IRAs, municipal bonds if you own them, and potentially life insurance if you've properly structured it and are taking loans from it. The goal is to begin moving money from left to right, from taxable towards income tax-free, if you are able, and if it benefits your tax situation in the long term. So the first step is knowing where among these three buckets your current assets are located. And the next step is considering whether moving some of that money from taxable or tax-deferred options to tax-free options is a possibility and would fit your overall plan. Now, if we're currently in a low tax environment headed higher, does it make sense to pay tax now to convert things like 401ks and IRAs to Roth? Isn't this a potential window of opportunity? Well, I think so, at least for some of you. And I encourage everyone on this call to engage with us around tax time so that we're up to date on your situation and can make intelligent recommendations based on your particular tax plan. Second tactic is to be more tactical about your charitable giving. First, consider bunching. Bunching is used to create a bigger tax deduction in a given year. You can use a donor-advised fund to move your next 3 to 5 years of donations into a single year. Then you direct the disbursement as you would have anyway. And believe it or not, this can have a significant impact on your overall deductions, especially if you're one of those people who are just barely qualifying for the itemized deduction. Second tactic, if you're over the age of 70 and a half, you need to be using the QCD or qualified charitable deduction. Up to $105,000 of your required minimum distribution each year can be used to donate, and it is not included in your adjusted gross income. And this can reduce your tax liability and potentially what you pay for things like Medicare because of the income-related monthly adjustment amount, or IRMAA calculations. Okay, this is a great option for retirees giving to charity who don't itemize their deductions. And that's about 99% of people, given the latest tax statistics. Okay, there you have it. The potential coming tax trap and a few ways to navigate around it with proper planning. There's no questions in the queue this week. So, hey, thanks for being with me today. And we'll see you next week when once again, we'll be talking taxes. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you next week.